I'm really excited to bring you this next podcast where I dive into shame and help people identify events that bring on shame, but also what shame feels like, and then what shame prompts us to do. So if you're like me and want to understand better how emotions operate in our lives, particularly the emotion of shame, this next podcast is for you.
If you're like me, you know your mind can be your best or your worst friend. Our mind is an amazing tool that can do incredible things, but our mind can also create problems out of nowhere. Sometimes our mind keeps recommending the same solutions to problems even when they aren't working. I see this pattern play out as individuals try to overcome their anxiety, depression, or even struggles with pornography, using approaches that make sense but aren't very helpful. This podcast will show you how real researchers and clinicians are changing the way we approach mental health and reveal helpful research-supported principles designed to help real people with real problems. My name is Dr. Cameron Staley, and welcome to the Life After Series Radio.
So I wanted to begin this podcast with a bit of a confession. So if you've been listening to my other podcasts or listened to my other interviews, I've spent a lot of time talking about the role of mindfulness in increasing your awareness of your own emotions, your own body in the present moment. And mindfulness really is the foundation of contemporary mental health treatments like acceptance and commitment therapy, as well as dialectical behavior therapy. And I found mindfulness to be so helpful in increasing our awareness of our emotions. But I was thinking the other day that even though I can talk about it a lot better than maybe I could in the past, that mindfulness doesn't come natural to me and probably most people. And also, mindfulness, I use it many times to improve my awareness of my emotions, what I'm feeling in this moment. And awareness of emotions is probably not one of my strong suits either. So when I was a beginning graduate student studying clinical psychology and working with somebody on their identification of emotions, I kind of felt a bit like a hypocrite. Here I am trying to help people identify their feelings of sadness or anger or loneliness or despair, and yet I really couldn't identify those same feelings for myself. So I've discovered over the years that some people are actually pretty skilled at knowing what they're feeling, being able to put a label on that, and then communicate that with others. Then you got people like me that if somebody asks you how you're feeling, my repertoire was good, bad, fine, maybe okay. I had just a few options, and in reality, those aren't really names of emotions at all. So I've benefited a lot from learning different therapeutic approaches to not only help other people, but to improve my own understanding and awareness of emotions that I'm experiencing in my own life. So I wanted to walk through a few different emotions with each of you so we can understand where they come from, how we experience them, what they compel us to do, and then what we can do with them. So I've talked a lot about acceptance and commitment therapy. I found that to be a really effective treatment for compulsive behaviors like unwanted pornography viewing. I also tend to use it quite a bit with anxiety, and perfectionism tends to work pretty well. Also with OCD. But I also have done quite a bit with dialectical behavior therapy, which is another third way behavioral treatment that its core is mindfulness. So DBT is short for dialectical behavior therapy. It was developed by Marsha Linehan in the 90s, and it was designed to help train skills for people who struggled with chronic mental health concerns like self-harm, suicidal thoughts, pretty chaotic relationships, a lot of impulsivity. So there are four major areas or modules that Linehan developed, one of which is mindfulness. She developed one for interpersonal skills, one for managing distress, and then one on emotion regulation. And I found that curriculum to be really helpful. It's very straightforward, very simple. Instead of approaching mindfulness as a very abstract concept, Linehan does a really nice job breaking down what each of the components of mindfulness actually is. So, for example, she's detailed the 3 what skills of mindfulness. So, mindfulness begins with the first step of observing. So, we observe things through our senses. So, anything that we can see, listen to, taste, smell, touch, those are things that we can observe. Then after we observe something, we can describe that. So we can start to put words on that sensory experience. So we can describe what we're seeing visually. So if I first observed this object, that would be the first step of mindfulness. I can then put words to it and say, it's a cylinder shape. I see it's reflecting light. It's got some words on it. It's pretty light. I might probably put this in the category of a pen, a writing object. So description is really just putting words on what you're observing. So we observe things through our senses so we can describe them. And then the whole purpose of observing and describing is to allow us to participate, to actually engage in things in our life. So if I wanted to start writing with this, I wouldn't continue observing this or describing its features. I would hold it in my hand and begin to write. That would be me participating in this moment with something that I really want to do. So those what skills are really helpful to just break down mindfulness. And we can only do one of those at a time. We're either observing, we're describing, or we're participating. So I found that very kind of rational approach for understanding such an abstract concept as mindfulness really helpful. Then Linehan also came up with a few steps for how to act mindfully. So to be mindful is to do one thing at a time. So you may believe you're really good at multitasking, and there even is some research out there that says that those that believe they're good at multitasking may actually be less effective at it than others that don't think that they are. But really our mind's equipped to do one thing really well at one time. So the first step is to do one thing at a time. We also want to do it non-judgmentally. So if I'm writing, I like to do a lot of creative writing. So if I'm writing some story ideas down, I don't want to be judging them like, oh yeah, look at my penmanship, it's terrible. And I don't know how to use a comma, which is probably actually true. Or my grammar is awful, or that plot line doesn't make any sense, or no one's going to like this or read this. That's having a lot of judgments and evaluations that's really going to interfere with me just participating fully in this moment. So we want to be fully engaged and not critical or evaluating our performance or concerned about how other people may view that. We want to do it non-judgmentally. And then the last kind of house step is doing it effectively. So there's many times where we want to be right in a situation or want to force something to happen. But really mindfulness is about what needs to be done in this moment. So it's not about, I got to write the next great American novel. But really in this moment, what might be effective is just to get my thoughts out. And then maybe come back to them, reevaluate them, get some feedback from some of my writing friends. But doing what's effective in this moment. Not having the perfect first draft, but really just write. We call that generative writing. Just get it out on paper. So doing what's effective instead of what you think it should be or trying to be right in a certain way. So I found those descriptions of mindfulness to be really helpful in my own life as I practice more mindfulness informally in most of my day. So sometimes there are formal kind of meditation practices or guided meditations that can be really helpful. But often I find myself engaging in more informal moments of mindfulness, where I'm stopping, engaging my senses, trying to get my bearings where I am, and I'm just noticing thoughts, noticing emotions, bringing my awareness into my body, kind of my environment around me. Then I start to describe, what are the sensations that I'm feeling? I notice some tightness in my chest, maybe some elevated breathing. My speech is accelerating. Maybe I'm worried about how this is coming across. So I'm noticing some worry thoughts. So I'm starting to just categorize things that I'm experiencing. If I notice emotions, I might notice a sense of nervousness. And then I kind of use that language that I notice the feeling of nervousness with inside of me. Instead of I'm nervous, actually I take a step back from that and I notice that feeling of nervousness. Because yeah, that feeling can be really powerful and I can feel it in my chest. It can feel really heavy and tight. But there's a part of me that's not nervousness. That's just an emotion. It's something that occurs physically, and often I have thoughts and beliefs associated with that feeling of nervousness. But I am not nervousness. That's just information. And if I can observe it, describe it, it can be really useful for me. Then after that, I participate. So there's some thoughts and things I want to share with you, and yet recording myself for other people to listen to later is kind of scary. It makes me feel nervous. So if I get focused on I got to say the right thing, or I wonder what people are going to think, it's really going to interfere with me fully participating in this moment. Also, I can't do a bunch of different things at once. I've got to just think about this idea, and I can't be evaluating my performance as I'm doing this. And I got to focus on what's my objective. And that's to share some thoughts about emotions and mindfulness with you. So in Marcia Linehan's section on emotion regulation, she actually breaks down emotions to such a degree that I found it really helpful. So let's say that you're experiencing an emotion and you're able to detect what it is. Let's start with the emotion of shame. So for me, shame is such a bedrock emotion. It's something that's so universal that all of us as humans experience it. And it's it's my least favorite emotion to feel. It feels pretty terrible. But a few years ago, if you asked me if I ever felt shame, I'd probably say, nah, not really. I didn't really understand what the feeling of shame felt like. I didn't know what events brought it on. I didn't know how it changed my behaviors or my actions. And now that I've seen how shame operates more in other people's lives, I'm better able to detect how shame works for me. So it's helpful, I found, mindfulness to slow down enough to identify that you're probably feeling an emotion. So you're kind of getting in the ballpark. And then to actually improve your emotional vocabulary. So when you identify, like, I'm probably feeling something pretty strong, we have a lot of research that suggests that being able to label that emotion is going to help you manage it better. And it's also going to help you share that emotion with other people to improve your social support and increase the likelihood that you're going to get your needs met. So there's lots of advantages to mindfulness, slowing down, increasing awareness of your emotions. So I wanted to start with shame because shame is such an inescapable emotion that can be so powerful that I found that shame often underlies compulsive behaviors like pornography. A lot of people talk about unwanted pornography viewing as an addiction, a neurological or biological addiction. And for me, what has been so profound is the underlying emotion of shame that many people experience who are struggling with changing sexual behavior like unwanted pornography. I've also found a lot of shame underlies relationship concerns, insecurities, depression, anxiety, you name it. Shame probably rears its ugly head at some point. So if you're uncomfortable with the word shame, or like, I don't think I feel shame, there's some other names for shame that are really other types of emotions, but they're kind of in the ballpark of shame. So some people identify more with feeling shy. I'm just chronically shy. Or maybe they describe themselves as just pretty self-conscious. Other people I've heard talk about shame as feeling humiliated in front of other people, or maybe a milder version of humiliation would be embarrassment. So all of those could be different kind of degrees of intensity or different variations, but maybe kind of around that experience of shame. So just take a moment and maybe consider times in your life where you may have felt one of those emotions, or maybe thought that you may have experienced shame. It's not one of my favorite things to do. And yet I found that shame, even though it can feel pretty bad and can drive a lot of behavior, can also be quite connecting because it is an experience that most of us share. So if you're able to detect that feeling, what it's like, sometimes it's helpful to know what might bring that feeling of shame on. So for many people, the sense of being rejected by people in your life. So if your family has rejected you, or your friends, or your colleagues, or your community, maybe people in your cultural group, if you've felt rejected, or if you have been rejected by other people, that could be a precursor to feelings of shame. If other people find out that you've done something wrong, that can lead to feelings of shame. Sometimes if our behavior was wrong and people find that out, you may experience guilt. We're like, oh yeah, that action was wrong. Sorry, I guess I was speeding there. I feel bad about that action. I guess I do deserve that ticket. It's more of a feeling of guilt where that feeling is tied to an action. But if you start to feel like, wow, I am a terrible person because I broke the speed limit at that time. If it's more about you feeling bad and other people discovered things you've done wrong, that might be more that consistent or that feeling of shame. So if other people kind of remind you of things that you've done wrong, like, hey, remember when you had that pornography addiction? Or remember when you were so depressed you didn't really help around the house, or you actually didn't do a very good job with your assignments? Like being reminded of things that you may have done wrong or immoral may contribute to those feelings of shame as well. Also, being criticized about maybe aspects of who you are or your performance, things you've done that you might have been pretty proud about. So I've experienced that where I have done more creative writing, which is really fun. I published my first novel that came out January 2020, and it was so exciting to actually hold the copy of that book in my hands. Way more exciting than earning a PhD. And so I couldn't wait to share that with a bunch of people. And yet if someone's like, hey, you know, your grammar's not very good. It's like, oh, ouch, you're right. It isn't very good. I think I was just so focused on sharing this story. And yeah, your punctuation needs some work too. Oh, yeah, I guess I was just really excited to share this with you. I didn't know it would be kind of critiqued and criticized in that way. And that can bring up feelings of shame. And I'm discovering that's just part of creative writing and publishing. That is the world that it is, and it comes along with it. But it can bring up feelings of shame. Like, this is something I really cared about, and I want to share this with other people, and now it's being critiqued and analyzed. So if I think about our online social media world, that's kind of how it's set up. That we may come across an article or an image or a quote or something we really want to share with people, and some people embrace it and other people attack it, criticize it. So you may notice that feeling of shame come up for you. It also could be comparing some part of yourself or your behavior to some external standard and feeling that you're not living up to that standard. So maybe you have expectations for kind of gender norms about what a good man or what a good woman should do, or what a good father or a good husband or mother or wife should look like, or what a good psychologist should be, or someone who is a good creative writer, what a good friend should look like. And if you don't measure up to that expectation, you may have those experiences of shame as well. So I found that comparing yourself to any other standard that is unattainable or an unrealistic expectation can really foster those feelings of shame. Many times shame come out of the context of relationships. So if you're really close to somebody and trust them deeply, somebody you really care about, and then that person betrays you, they betray your trust, or they leave you, or they break up with you, that can lead to lots of feelings of shame where it may feel like, you know, I must not have been enough, or what did I do that was wrong? It could be that you do something pretty harmless or kind of goofy, and somebody laughs at you or makes fun of you, And that can be pretty humiliating in front of people that are important to you. Others may attack your integrity and believe you're trying to do something dishonest or problematic. And even though you may have really good intentions, people may see the world differently than you, than your experiences. So them attacking your integrity can lead you to question yourself, doubt yourself, and that can be experiences of shame. Also, many of us are pretty sensitive to, I'm trying to think the best way to talk about it. I guess our own body image, so how we perceive ourselves, and then concern about how other people might perceive yourself. So there may be parts of your appearance that you really dislike that you may try to hide, and that could be coming from experiences of shame. That could be due to body weight, body size, having ears that you think are too big or too small, concern about kind of your voice or how you walk, how you breathe, your posture, all those physical characteristics that you may dislike, and being afraid that people might discover those can lead to experiences of shame. Also, probably the biggest one that I've discovered, and it's so rough as a parent because I catch myself doing this, is any times that you are invalidating somebody's other emotional experience. So if you are like a child and you get really scared at a movie and you start to cry, your parent might just say, hey, it's just a movie. It's no big deal. You don't need to cry about this. Yeah, that may seem harmless, but it's invalidating. And you feel bad for having an emotional reaction that you can't control. Or there may be times where you got physically hurt and you may have had someone around you. This could have been a sibling or a caregiver or a friend. Say, hey, that's not that big a deal. Why are you being a baby? That little invalidating comment can lead to feelings of shame where it's like, yeah, maybe something is wrong with me. Or why are you so emotional? You're always so reacting. You're overreacting to everything. You shouldn't be so emotional. And so if you hear that message enough over the years, you start to develop feelings of shame around experiencing emotion, that somehow that is wrong or bad or that you're doing it incorrectly. So those are some of the events that can contribute to feelings of shame. So those are things kind of outside of us, but then there's things internally. So Marsha Linehan talks about how we interpret those events that may prompt our shame. So it may be that people have actually rejected you in your life, but what I find to be really powerful is often that we believe others are going to reject us, maybe even more than they are. And I hear this quite a bit, where it's like, yeah, people around me are so judgmental, they're so critical, they're thinking this and they're thinking that, and they don't think that this is good enough or that. Then I'll ask them, it's like, yeah, what have people said to you? And it's like, well, they haven't really said anything, but I really feel like if they knew this about me, they would reject me. They would think that what I'm doing is wrong or bad. But nobody has said that to you. No, but it feels like they really would. So I got to make sure I can't share my beliefs around this or my values or my preferences or my likes or dislikes or my struggle to really think that people would judge me or reject me for that. So sometimes just believing that people are judgmental can be just as impactful in eliciting those feelings of shame within yourself. Also, a lot of this comes from our own critical voice. So believing that you are inferior or not good enough, or you have a strong reaction that somebody said something and you felt hurt and you're like, shouldn't feel hurt. That wasn't that big a deal. I just need to grow up. I need to be tougher, need to be stronger. That message might not be coming from anybody outside of you. That might be coming from yourself, where you're kind of invalidating that emotion that you're reacting. You might be comparing yourself to other people in your life. You might feel like you are unlovable. If that's something that you've felt or believed, often that is kind of a code term for shame, where it's like, if people really knew the true me or things that I've done or things that have happened to me, they wouldn't love me. And I found that is often really linked to shame. Also, people that believe that they are bad, immoral, or wrong. And that's why I struggle when people over-identify with terms like addiction. So when I work a lot with individuals that struggle with pornography and they label themselves as a pornography addict, that label starts to get attached to their identity, that they are doing something immoral, or not just doing something immoral, but they themselves are immoral, that they're disgusting or bad. And so I find that those really strong labels can foster those feelings of shame. So I try to move away from labels like addiction and instead try to identify what are those underlying emotions. And for many people with compulsive behaviors like that, it is shame. Often I hear people talk about feeling that they are broken, that there's something wrong with them, they're defective in some way. Those are common beliefs that we have about ourselves. Thinking that you're a failure or that you're ugly, people are repulsed by you, maybe thinking about your beliefs, your interests are stupid, that people would have a really hard time accepting you. So any of those thoughts that we have can be how we're interpreting events around us and can further contribute to feelings of shame. So those are the events outside of you and thoughts that are occurring within ourselves. And the next part I find really important, and one thing that I think people gloss over is often when we are experiencing emotion really powerfully, you may have heard someone says, well, it's just a choice. Like you're choosing what you're feeling, just choose to be happy or choose to get over it or choose to feel better about yourself. And what I've found with emotions is they're not a choice. They are a reaction to events around you and also a reaction to thoughts and beliefs that you're having around yourself. That experiencing an emotion is a biological event. So our attitudes, we might have more choice over that. That I found that there's times that I have a really good attitude, positive attitude around exercise, and times that it's a chore and I have a pretty negative attitude around that. That my approach to something might be more of a choice. But some of the emotions around that, they're just kind of in reaction to an event outside or inside of ourselves. So some of the things that occur physically when we're experiencing shame, and this may be a little bit different for everybody, but for me, shame is that pit in my stomach. It feels like nausea to me. It feels like a bit like food poisoning. That something feels off, disgusting, unsettling, really uneasy. I describe shame as a pretty dark feeling inside. And I keep kind of touching my chest because it feels so internal. It feels like it fills your kind of chest cavity. It can feel daunting. It can feel like a sense of dread. It can also feel like you're shrinking or wanting to despair. So sometimes I see actual physical behavioral changes with people where they can't look me in the eyes, where their gaze is just kind of locked down at the floor. They're not able to look up at me, or they kind of curl up in a ball or put their hands around them or kind of turn away or they're looking in a different direction. Those are actual physical changes that occur from that experience of shame, where we're actually physically trying to withdraw and hide from the world and from people around us that might judge us or reject us. That is how powerful shame can be. So because of that, it impacts our behavior. So emotions put our emotions in action. So with that, we actually may withdraw. We might start to avoid people that were critical of us or people that have harmed us. We might try to be secretive around our actions, like we can't make sure that nobody knows that I'm feeling really depressed or I'm feeling worthless or that I struggled with pornography or eating concerns. Like people can't discover that because if they discover that, it just ramps up those feelings of shame, and that can be crippling for people. So we start to distance ourselves from others. And one of my favorites that I do to myself is I start to avoid myself. I start to ignore my thoughts, my body, my reactions, my needs. So I think I'm feeling ashamed. I don't like that feeling. So I'm like, I'm just going to check out from you. I'm just going to go spend time with other people and ignore you. And that may feel strange for those of you that don't do that, but that's kind of where I go. It's like, yeah, I'm tired of you. Like you feel bad. I'm not going to hang out with you for a while. Or I retreat to my favorite place, which is my thoughts, my creativity, my interests, and I try to leave this body, my stomach, where it feels kind of nauseated and queasy. So you might lower your head, You might become very submissive, start to apologize over and over and over, and really just struggling with speech, lowering your volume. So really just kind of getting small and shrinking. So if you're someone that's like, yeah, I don't feel those things very often, but it's like, oh, I've noticed that I do that sometimes, or I've had some of those thoughts. But there's a lot to the experience of emotions than just feeling shame. Is there events that contribute to feelings of shame, and then shame compels us to do things? And then they linger for a while. So that's what kind of shame compels us to do. Those are some of the actions. But after that, Linehan talks about after effects of emotions. And she includes things like avoiding thinking about what you've done wrong or shutting down altogether. So this might be just sleeping, napping a lot, oversleeping, withdrawing from relationships, not feeling emotions, distracting yourself, maybe even engaging in impulsive or compulsive behaviors like overeating or shopping or looking at pornography or exercising. So things that you're doing just to try to not feel those emotions. You might feel really preoccupied with yourself. You might even feel outside of yourself or numb or in shock. Some people might kind of do the opposite and start attacking other people. Where you feel so bad internally, you might start to attack and kind of be on defense. So sometimes if we feel like people are going to reject us, we might reject them first, like kind of beat them to the punch. We might start to isolate, withdraw, feeling alienated. We might see impairments in our problem solving, in our creativity. We might see problems with our work, in our relationships. So those are some of the things that can linger. But what I found is we often then engage in behaviors that perpetuate that cycle. So I keep referring back to pornography because I've seen that shame cycle where I see all these behaviors where somebody has a moral belief that viewing sexual images is wrong or immoral, but they're doing it because they're feeling pretty negatively. And they're viewing that sexual images because it feels better in that moment. It allows them to kind of check out from that feeling of nausea in your stomach. And there's an experience of endorphins. And often the actors that are portrayed in erotica are really happy to see you. They're not rejecting you. So it's like getting a feeling of connection momentarily. But then after you're done viewing pornography, you feel terrible again. It's like, oh gosh, I can't believe I did that terrible thing. People can't know about it. What is so wrong with me? I got to be so defective. Must be an addict. What a terrible, awful person. And then you start to avoid other people, withdraw, or kind of get irritable. And after a while, it's like you're probably going to engage in a behavior again to cope with those after effects of emotions. So you're probably going to look at pornography again. So I've seen that cycle there. I've seen it with eating disorders, substance use disorders. I've seen it with relationships where these just things kind of cycle. And so we have different labels for these disorders, but I've seen that this emotional cycle often permeates many of these. And yet we want to think it's more complex than that. It's uncomfortable to really identify and sit with our emotions, but also to accept the idea that emotions are driving our actions. They're compelling us to overeat or look at sexual images that we're uncomfortable with, or maintain relationships with people that aren't healthy for us. And to think that a lot of that's coming from an emotion that we don't want to feel that's that powerful. And I've seen that over and over. So I hope this was helpful to walk through the emotion of shame a little bit more, what some events might be that could trigger it, how our thought process can further exacerbate that feeling of shame, and then what shame compels us to do, and then the lingering effects. So my hope is in the next couple of podcasts is to walk through a few different emotions and keep using material from Marsha Linehan and Dialectical Behavioral Therapy, which in my mind is kind of the cousin to acceptance and commitment therapy. They're both mindfulness-based, third-way behavioral treatments that I found to be really helpful. So if you're like me and needs a little more guidance and education on what is that emotion and how does it work and why can't I just think it away, I found these concepts to be really helpful to recognize that an emotion is a response, and that emotion is information for us. So you might not like how it feels, and you may want to feel something different. But what I found, or some things I know about emotions or have come to learn, is that no emotion is permanent. But the more we try to suppress, ignore, get rid of emotions, the more they keep coming back. And when I just take a moment to be like, oh, what is this? Like, oh, yeah, it's shame. This feels terrible. Yep, I don't like, oh, yep, there it is. It's in my stomach. Feel like a bad person. Feel like I want to hide. This is shame. Okay. So what is happening around me that may have elicited this feeling? Maybe what are some thoughts I'm thinking about myself that brought this up? And what are behaviors that it's compelling me to do? Okay. Yeah, I'm understanding what this is going on. As you slow that process down, instead of having this on auto repeat for the rest of your life, you can make decisions. So now when I'm feeling shame, what I do is I talk to safe people in my life. I talk to my partner, who's fantastic at listening to me. I've got really good colleagues that are always encouraging and supportive of me when I'm struggling with something. So instead of isolating, withdrawing, which is exactly what shame wants me to do, I'm going to open up and share it. And that's vulnerable, and it kind of puts you in that zone that you could be judged by other people. But I found that opening up to safe people is how I reduce feelings of shame and reduce the impact that shame has on my life. So there we go. There's your tutorial on shame. Take care, everyone.
Hey, thanks for listening. Please remember to rate and subscribe. I know you might be facing some issues in your life or know someone who is. Issues like anxiety, challenges in dealing with emotions, or other compulsive behaviors like unwanted pornography. And I know it's tough to talk to people about problems. Difficult to stare those obstacles down that we face in life and to really know how to deal with them. It's hard to know what to say and when to say it. And then when that moment you finally reach out to family and friends happens, sometimes it falls flat. I haven't found many programs teaching effective strategies like mindfulness, how to improve relationships, and ways to address unwanted pornography viewing through research-supported principles. So whether you simply want to help with a problem like unwanted pornography, difficulty responding to emotions, or just want to understand the world of someone struggling with porn a little better, head over to lifeafterpornography.com and get in on the next training. There you'll learn the exact same strategies individuals addicted to pornography used to transform their lives by implementing principles from evidence-based treatment shown effective in research for reducing unwanted pornography viewing. You'll learn the secrets, the myths, the enemies to recovery, and the LAP framework for dealing with unwanted porn viewing that we call WAVE. If that's something that interests you, click the link in the description or just head over to lifeafterpornography.com. I'm Dr. Cameron Staley. See you on the inside.